I should check for us. Yeah, I'm recording. I don't have the email configured here, so it's not gonna work.
Which email? Is that
Yes.
HDMI?
No,
Nope.
she doesn't have an HDMI
I
either.
don't have any. I did email it to you.
Yeah, but I don't have the email configured in this computer right now.
Ah.
I'm trying to get to it through my. You can start if you want and come back to me later.
Okay. Waiting on one more person.
Yeah, it's we are on time now, right now.
It's true. Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of like
Welcome.
the list of sessions is so overwhelming. They're like,
Welcome, everyone. I think we're just going to give it one more minute while we're waiting for an additional panelist to show up. Kelly, have you seen KK?
Sorry.
Have you seen KK?
No, I haven't. Should I guys try to find it?
Nah. Maybe pay him.
Is that working, that one?
no, that's not.
Yeah.
Usually, this is the one that most people need. So,
Yeah, I have DisplayPort.
somebody else have
DisplayPort or VGA.
No.
I do have DisplayPort.
What are you doing at 4?
Is this
Mean DisplayPort. Nothing.
Okay. Okay. Good. I've got to focus for one second.
Sure. Okay. All right, well, we can do it later. You said you're running off today. I just want to,
I'm leaving at 9:30 tonight.
all right.
They're fetching the cable.
And KK's not here. Who? KK. So Constantinos. Constantinos Komatis, so it's so much easier to just say KK.
Makes a lot of sense.
As long as I get full brownie point for it.
She can see her.
Sure.
You're missing someone, and you're missing
Oh, well, that's what it is.
the picture.
The pictures are always good. People like that.
Yeah, maybe we'll get started. Welcome everyone to our panel on addressing the digital divide in North American Indigenous communities. I'm Mark Buell. I'm the Regional Bureau Director for North America at the Internet Society. I live in Ottawa, but have responsibilities for Canada and the U.S. This panel comes out of an event. It's the result of an event we held in November 2017 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we brought together 150 Indigenous community network operators and representatives from Indigenous communities across Canada and the United States to talk about community networks as a solution for connectivity challenges, in particular in rural and remote communities across the two countries. It was an amazing event. What we really wanted to do with it was to create a community of support across Turtle Island for finding network solutions for some of the hardest communities to connect in the world. Katie has passed around some postcards for the 2018 Indigenous Connectivity Summit, which will be in October in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories. It's an amazing event. It's a great town, and I invite everyone to come with us. We have a diverse group at the table. Unfortunately, Brian Tagaban, who is a network operator in New Mexico, is unable to join because he had to go to the FCC because there's a decision coming down today on connectivity on tribal lands and spectrum for tribal communities. So it's unfortunate, but we have a great group of panelists as it is here. So we'll have a few questions. We'll talk as a panel. But really, I'd like to have a conversation with all of you so we can all better understand what connectivity looks like, what solutions are out there for Indigenous communities, and what we need to do to create that environment that enables communities to come together to connect themselves on their own terms. So with that, what I'll do is, starting with Madeline, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and answer one of two questions. One, what does connectivity look like in your community or the communities that you work in? And the second question is, what does connectivity mean for your community?
Okay, thank you, Mark. My name is Madeline Redfern. I am the mayor for the city of Iqaluit, which is the capital of Nunavut. For those who may not know where that is, it is on Baffin Island, next to Greenland. So approximately 4 hours direct jet flight from here. As the capital, we end up having the majority of people living in our city. There's 25 communities spread across the whole territory. There's 2 million square kilometers, and I can tell you we're outnumbered by seals significantly compared to the 38,000 residents that we have in the territory. I'm also the president of the Nunavut Association of Municipalities, so I wear those two hats probably when I speak today, in the sense of that I also must share with you that in the smaller communities outside of Iqaluit, populations can range from approximately 112 people to a couple thousand and everything in between. There are no roads into Nunavut, so everyone has to fly in, and it's incredibly expensive. The average cost of a flight from Ottawa to Iqaluit is approximately $2,500, even though it's only 3 hours and about the same distance as Ottawa to Fort Lauderdale. With respect to your question as to what does connectivity look like in where I live, it's challenging, it's poor, it's unstable, and it's slow, and it's expensive. So to give you an idea what that actually means, I had a slide here, but right now you could buy a package for approximately $80 for 20 gigabytes for the month, with a 3 megabytes download and approximately 512 upload. If you pay $180, you can jump up by 10 gigabytes to 30. Speed for download and upload remain the same. For $400, you can buy 50 gigabytes. The download speeds increase up a little bit to 1 megabits, and download jumps from 3 to 5. So what does that mean? It means that we almost always go over. And that's even if you don't use videoing, so forget Netflix, forget online gaming, forget video conferencing, all that kind of stuff. Even though there's been a little bit of an increase in speed by many of the providers, all that really means and translates in is that you use your whole month's data allowance in 2 days. And so for the next 28 days plus, you are going to be overages. And so my last month's internet bill, and I don't do, as I said, Netflix or online gaming, or I'm not a big YouTube watcher at all, anything that uses high data. My home internet bill, and I am a politician, so I do sometimes work from home, and I do a little bit of business on the side, but it's $1,200 for the month. So what that means, not just for me, is every household, especially if you have children, high data users, consumers, is it's, you spend a lot of time, as my deputy mayor says, being the internet traffic cop and fighting with your family all the time. I think, when I get my internet bill, I just get into a foul mood for about an hour, pay it and then try to move on until the next month. What's the second question?
What does it mean for your community?
Oh, my God. Okay. So, so what does it mean? It means that it's very tough to do what we need to do, even as government. So, I'm with the city, and it's very difficult to communicate, with each other as employees. It's difficult to communicate with our residents. There's a lot of things that are held back. I think the majority of our IT folks, whether it's my local government or territorial government or the federal departments or businesses, everyone ends up having an IT person who plays traffic cop, and so literally our territorial government won't even allow their employees or the majority of the employees to be on Facebook. Anything that just consumes data. You have to end up, if you're a deputy minister, then you might have, way more sort of access, what you can send and what you can receive. But even then, given that we have such a limited pipe, because we're 100% satellite dependent, I should have mentioned that earlier, my apologies, is that there's just, you can't send large files. And that there's a whole bunch of ways in which you try to manage data flow, which is like, okay, well, let's try to send some of our data at 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. When you hope most people are asleep, and or you do the old fashioned and you have to save data on thumb drives and put them on the plane. So if you are trying to do something like land applications or land development, you have to send it out. It also means that when you're trying to create cultural content or any content, you usually have to engage someone in the South. And they have, so they'll create your websites, because you can't do website creation, in our territory. You host the websites down south. If you are creating videos, cultural videos, language applications, all that fun stuff, again, you send it down south. The editing happens there, because you just can't do online editing, or you do it on, editing on your computer, and then you ship it out. At the end of the day, also what that means is that everyone else in the world has easier access to our cultural content than we do. And that's absurd. And I think that's just, the kind of the tip of the iceberg of what that means to us.
Thank you. Bill?
Bill Murdoch. Up until recently, I was actually working two jobs. I was with the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat in Manitoba. We look after health centers in Manitoba. My other hat was with MFNERC, which is Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center. They recently just became, this past year, they became a school division. They provide school division type services. My role with both organizations was IT specialist. I know it's pretty generic. I actually wrote my own job description. In a nutshell, anything IT, privacy, or security related with any of our projects would come across my desk. On the MF-NERC side, in Manitoba, there's 63 First Nation communities. 47 of them have 57 of them have schools, but 40 of them have health centers. So for me to say on one community what their internet connectivity would be like, it's diverse. Like some communities actually have fiber. Some communities are reliant on satellite. There's so many wireless hops. When there is an issue with connectivity going down, it could take a couple weeks for them to figure out where the problem is. So their internet could be down for a couple weeks. It could be down for a couple hours. I know in one community it was wireless and their tower was struck by lightning and the people that installed the tower didn't go deep enough with the grounding wire, so it fried every piece of equipment on the tower. And you got, modem issues with, packet loss, and you're trying to troubleshoot. So you need boots on the ground, you need the expertise. And of course, you got one of the communities on the satellite dish, it's called a horn. It's just a plastic piece. So when it snows, it keeps the snow out of the electronics. Because what happens if you take the horn off, it snows, the snow sits there, and then the heat from the equipment causes the snow to melt, and the water gets into the electronics. So the kids like to steal those horns. So just things like this, you gotta. What is connectivity? Actually, recently, one of the communities was, they recently got fiber into the community. And I know the owner of the ISP, and we were chatting, and he's saying, yeah, there's this one household. They upgraded to 100 meg symmetrical, and their upload and download is about 2 terabytes a month. MF NERC, a school provided school division type services with 250 core staff. We also do distance education and pushing a lot of data for offsite backups, and we do about 6 terabytes a month. So an organization with 250 staff, 6 terabytes, and one house doing 2 terabytes in the community. I don't know what they're doing, but it's a lot of fun. Technically this past Monday, I've started a new job. So I'm no longer on the health and education areas. I'm now with the backhaul internet. The company is called Clear Sky Connections. They're a brand new First Nation organization operating in Winnipeg with the goal of running fiber into all 63 communities to be inclusive. Even though there's currently 4 communities that have fiber, there's also 4 communities that are not connected to the hydro grid. They rely on diesel generator, and they obviously rely on satellite internet. We actually have a school with about 800 students that rely on 2 5 meg satellite connections. So talking about her numbers for a house, we have a school that we actually have to throttle the internet connection to 4 megs just to keep the cost down. So what would connect to, well, with fiber, it would provide with connectivity, access to distance education, because a lot of the schools in the First Nations, their course catalog, well, in Manitoba, you need 31 high school credits. So the course catalog in a lot of these schools is 31. So giving them access to something like high school physics and chemistry. To be hired with hydro in Manitoba, you need high school physics. None of the First Nation schools offer high school physics. It's the only way to get it is either leave the community or distance education, which is one of the courses that MF does provide through distance ed. So education opportunities, electronic medical records, having just access to electronic medical information to have that coordinated care. And of course, once you give them the tool to access the internet, there's going to be a lot of benefit that we simply can't envision. We don't know about business opportunities, selling stuff online, writing code, even coloring comic books. I know there was a gentleman that I ran into one time. That's what he did for a living. He colored comic books from a company in the States, but it's all digital, it's all online, so he never actually has to go there. So there's all these opportunities that we don't know.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. Nico, and you're just back from Mexico.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about the communities you were working in Mexico? And first introduce yourself.
Okay.
The Community Networks Nomad.
Okay, hi, my name is Nicolas. I come from an NGO, an Argentinian civil society organization. It's called Alter Mundi. We work mainly in Latin America, but also in other parts of the world, in supporting communities that want to connect themselves by developing technologies for them in order for them not to have to get in all these crazy things like networking. So complex stuff, we make it easy for them to be able to approach it in a easy pace. And also we support them in the process of deploying the networks with training and technical support if it's needed. So as I said, we work in Latin American territory. In particular, I have been working with a Mexican organization. It's called Redes por la Sustentabilidad, Redes AC. Sorry, I don't know. It's a super long name. But anyways, it's redesac.org.mx. They work very close to the First Nations within Mexican territory. And in particular, I have been working with 4 communities. The Wirarica people in Jalisco, the Zapotecos in Yaviche, in Tlahuitoltepec, the Mijes, and in Abasolo, the Saltales. So this is, and it's quite difficult to define their culture because these are actually very different communities. The Wiraricas live in a very dry area, like desertic place. And the rest of the communities live in very deep forests, like not deep in the sense of depth, but very abundant. I mean, you throw a seed and a tree grows, like these kind of places. So the way they live and the way they relate with technology is quite different. Something that is in common with all of them is that they have a way of living that is very that can happen without the Western world, very much without the Western world in a way. I mean, so they have their own dynamics, their own economics, their own way of survival. So not survival, or way of living, but also the economics are complex because they are mainly farmers, and farming is not well recognized economically. Mostly when you only sell the raw materials. So if you produce something, you get better prices, but if you don't. So money is not abundant within these communities. So if they want to do infrastructure, it requires someone else to help them, or for them to do a big economic effort or a big investment within their community. So these are all very early, very small, and we have just begun with them to work with. So the way we approach the being part of the internet process was actually not asking what internet can be for them, but actually what they need internet to be for them. And in that process, we're working that. I mean, it's not, we don't have an answer, and neither have them, because they have never had it. I mean, they have had because they relate with the rest of the world, and they need to. I mean, they already have smartphones, they have WhatsApp, they have those things, but only when they go to places where there is connectivity. And so they have these internet experiences, but then they go back to their communities and they have their own principles, their own values that they want to nurture, their own culture that they want to share, their own language. And none of those are on the internet. Not even a little bit, like 0%. So for them to be connected to the internet would mean to finish a process that started when the school arrived. I mean, the school made them less indigenous in a way, because it was taught in Spanish and it was other teachings that came, and this would finish with their cultures. So it's a tough call to be helping them in that process. If we bring internet to them, we'll do that. If it's not a conscious process, then a lot of things are gonna come without them acknowledging that, and that's also a problem. So what it means for them, connectivity means for them to be able to connect with other communities, to share their culture, what they are already doing. I mean, these are part of the outcomes of the conversations that we have been having. It's not clear yet what it will mean for them. For sure, it will allow for them to be more connected with each other. Also to be connected with the expats, that happen a lot. A lot of members of their families travel abroad, usually to the United States, to earn more money, to do whatever they can do over there. And it happens that some time ago, these people leave their communities and don't come back, and you don't have a way to connect with them for years. Now you can call them, but with internet you can keep a much more closer connection. Another example is the community in Puebla. This is another one that we are working with. This is a Nahuatl and Totoneco community. They are using the infrastructure to nurture their own culture. So they got the tools that we, as Western world, created, and they made it to work for them by creating a small wiki site for their culture. So they are nurturing an encyclopedia of their own culture, and also a library of phonetics, because they are losing the way their language is said. So they are recording the elders to be able to keep that and use it as a learning tool for the youngsters. So those are two examples, but it's really a very we are in an inception moment right now.
Excellent, thank you. Konstantinos, did you want to talk about the Internet Society's experience globally with connecting the unconnected communities?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Konstantinos Communities. I am the Director of Policy Development for the Internet Society. And I won't bore you with what the Internet Society is. I suspect you all know. One of the things, however, that I would like to mention is that development and building the Internet has always been part of the core of the organization since its inception 25 years ago. So when it came to us discussing and deciding to focus on community networks over the past 5 years, and predominantly this year, it was an easy option. I want to tell you 3 stories about community networks, of what is happening globally when it comes to people coming together to create those networks. The first one takes place in Georgia, in the mountains of Tusheti, which is this gorgeous place that access is only by donkey, literally by a donkey. And it has a population of less than 1,000 people that wanted to connect to the internet because they produce products that they are very proud of and they wanted to export. So a combination and a collaborative approach between the Georgian government, the regulator, the Internet Society, the Internet Society Georgian chapter, and the Tusheti Development Fund resulted in the creation of a community network that allowed people to actually connect and start selling cheese. The second story comes out of Mexico, a small place again called Oaxaca, yes, and Oaxaca, sorry.
That's it.
And an organization called Rhizomatica that supports the building and creation of community networks for people to be able and communicate, and also for schools to be able to connect. Again, there we see a collaborative approach with many actors involved. And what is interesting in this case is the role of the Mexican government, actually creating policies allowing the creation of those networks, but also providing the incentives for those networks to be created. They have something they call social purpose licenses, and those are licenses that are granted, as the term says, for social purposes, but they do something that is quite unique. They lift barriers to competition, because in many, many cases, community networks cannot compete, of course, with big operators. And they set spectrum aside that is vital, of course, for community networks to operate, so for non-traditional operators. The third story comes from my own country, Greece, a very tiny small village called Sarandaporo, which has, currently there are 400 people left. And the story goes that the elderly in that people wanted to talk to their grandkids who do no longer visit the village. And the only way to do that was by using the internet, Skype or Facebook. The story is quite fascinating to me because I relate so much to that. You see, the pictures that are coming out of San Raporo show 80-year-old women all sitting together, connecting wires that are able then to connect to the internet and allow them to talk to their grandkids. So here we have 3 examples of community networks with similar objectives, similar needs, and facing the same problem, connectivity, and seeking to address it through the same way, by coming together and building a network that allows them to achieve that goal. So, community networks for the internet society, and this is what we believe the world should see and think when we talk about community networks, are an innovative approach to connecting people, and they are complementary to existing networks. They're not competing, they're not trying to supplement them, they just coexist. And they are there to satisfy different needs of people. They are bottom up, no one should go and direct them what they should be doing or why they should be connected, and are built and operated by local communities with local communities for local communities. And that is the other very important factor. So we are talking a lot about the multi-stakeholder model in these settings and collaborative approach in these settings. Well, if you really want collaboration, true collaboration, you should look no further than community networks, because those are primarily a byproduct of collaborative approaches. And of course they do that because we are in 2018 and we have made strides in technology. However, we are still having half of the world's population not connected to the internet. And the story gets even more depressing when we see when we look at remote areas, underserved areas, or areas where commercial operators do not find any reason, any business reason for them to go. Yet they're left out of democratic processes, of economic opportunities, and the sharing of culture and ideas, as we heard. On top of everything else, community networks are facilitators for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. A couple of years ago, the United Nations, with the other stakeholders, this was not just governments, businesses were there and civil society was there, committed to a number of things. And one of those things, SDG 9, was about ICTs. SDG 9C in particular talks about the need for ICTs and for to go to every single place in the world, and for the connectivity to be available to all people. So I will talk mainly about policy. There are predominantly 3 key issues that the Internet Society, when it comes to community networks, focuses on. The first one is equipment. We are trying to find equipment, and do not think that this equipment costs thousands or millions of dollars. We are talking about $5,000, $2,000 of equipment, and this is intentional. The equipment needs to be old, because the newer it is, the more expensive it is, and because we are talking about places where occasionally weather conditions, Tusheti, for example, the weather conditions in Tusheti during winter are terrible. So if you have a very expensive equipment that breaks down, this needs to be replaced. And getting the parts that were destroyed replaced will cost money. That's the first thing. The second thing that is important in community and for community networks is capacity building. It's not just going up there, putting up the network, and then you leave and forget everything. You need to train people. You need to make them comfortable with the technology. And also, because after the community network is set up, it operates some sort of a business, you need to create a sustainable business model that they are able then to utilize in order to expand and benefit from. And the last bit, of course, is policy. There are policymakers, and governments need to start rethinking of policies that will incentivize and will allow the creation of those networks. Of course, when we're talking about policies, predominantly, but not only, we're talking about spectrum allocation, which is required, whether it is spectrum, then you have TV white spaces, of course, and microwaves, etc. I will finish by just doing a little bit of self-promotion. Recently, we just released a policy brief on innovative licenses for community networks. And there, we do not only identify some key challenges when it comes to licenses for community networks, whether there are licenses relating to spectrum or whether there are licenses relating to operating a business within a country. But we also offer some recommendations that policymakers can take and can implement in order to be able and allow for community networks to flourish. And again, this is not reinventing the wheel. Mexico has social purpose licenses. Brazil and Colombia are moving towards something similar, where they allow community networks to actually start operating without the fear of regulation that might come down on them. And I will stop here.
Thank
so
you.
We can just
Thank you. The one thing that I've heard from each of the panelists is that every community is different. Madeline, you talked about communities, this 150 to 2,000 people and everything in between, and I know Nunavut quite well. Some communities are much more isolated than others. Some are much more traditional than others. So you talked about communities in Manitoba with varying degrees of connectivity, and communities in northern Manitoba, the needs are very different than communities in the south. Nico, similar. Konstantinos talked about the need for a bottom-up approach that's really community-driven to solve these connectivity issues. But when you're looking at every community being unique, every community having its own personality and its own unique challenges, what are the common elements or common attributes to a network that make it successful and sustainable? If we're talking about connecting 26 communities in Nunavut, how can we ensure that each of those networks that gets deployed is sustainable and will succeed? Because we've had experience globally that at times they don't, they fall apart. But what are the common attributes that you've seen in communities that would make a network succeed?
Well, I think what's important, and I didn't mention it, is that Iqaluit, as the capital, we actually consume over 70% of our satellite broadband. So finding a solution for Iqaluit, which is likely fiber, instantly not only benefits our community, but benefits the other 24 Nunavut communities, because then you're freeing up a ton of bandwidth. There are some initiatives that are underway, and exactly how long they'll take and how much they'll cost, is being determined. So there's a new GEO, so a new satellite that's going up, and that's supposed to sort of provide some assistance. It's being touted as going to increase our speeds by, I think, 3 to 5 times, but 3 to 5 times of very little is still not a lot. It's supposed to increase the data by 3 to 5 times, and again, 5 gigabits to 15 is not a lot. But there's a couple of the other companies are looking at LEOs, so low Earth orbiting satellites. Some of it on a relatively small scale. It's useful for some deployment, in so much as that if you've got, let's say, a research station and your data is not time sensitive, so it's not real-time internet, then when the satellite comes, you can upload, and then you have a mechanism to sort of to dump somewhere else, somewhere faster, somewhere better, and then share it by sort of the regular worldwide sort of systems. There's also, at this point, most people may have heard of OneWeb. Telesat, which is an American-based company, now has a similar sort of desire to have a OneWeb, so a whole constellation of LEOs. And we're being told that, you know, if this does happen, then the North would by default also benefit. So the issue is for us to some extent is a wait see, and there's another initiative that I'm directly working with a partner in what effectively would be community clouds. So trying to actually have a lot of local content and data accessible without having to go onto the sort of regular internet. So everything from our local, territorial, regional governments, our Inuit organizations, all of that sort of, you know, cultural content, language content, and so that you would be able to limit how much people actually have to, you know, use their own sort of data caps to access stuff that is truly local. I mean, if people want to sort of still watch YouTube, you're not going to download the whole YouTube sort of catalog of data onto a community cloud. But nonetheless, that could really assist in you know, reducing traffic. So you end up having to be a lot more sort of flexible, creative, but at the same time, some of it is within our control, some of it's not, and sometimes you push, trying to get a variety of different solutions, and so try not to back one pony.
What I like about the project that you have in Iqaluit is, well, in Nunavut generally, is that it's a designed, it's a solution for the North, by the North.
Except that we can't, unfortunately, probably pay for everything ourselves.
No.
So, I mean, when you have 38,000 people, and depending on which stat you read, you know, anywhere from 30 to 70% of people living in poverty, you know, $20,000 annual income, which effectively in the South is about $10,000, and then households with, you know, usually from about 5 to 15 in a household. I mean, literally, people are hungry. So, but yet people, even when you're hungry, they want to be connected, you know, because not having connectivity is a different form of poverty. It limits, you know, your connections and accessibility to, you know, your other family members, you know, grandparents and children, but, you know, everyone. So we need to make good also business cases. Maybe what I'll just end is that Canada doesn't really have a national internet strategy, let alone regional ones. And I think what I wanted to just, you know, sort of add on is, you know, this country is built, you know, and exists because it's on Indigenous lands, and we are a massive resource extraction sector, from, you know, forestry to mining to, you know, everything, and yet there's no universal or postage stamp approach to internet, and so having just the business model, you know, be the way that internet or connectivity is provided in this country, you know, leads to these, you know, disparities. And they are social, political, economic disparities. And if we truly believe in, you know, everything from United Nations universal human rights and Canadian values, and then we need to realize that you can't just extract our, you know, natural resources from where we live in the rural, remote communities and then screw us out of things like, you know, connectivity. Can you tell I'm a politician?
Thank you. Bill, I'll rephrase the question a little bit for you and ask you, what makes Clear Sky different, and what makes its potential for success that much greater?
Well, the common elements in what makes Clear Sky successful, I think it's the same question. So it's just a little bit of background about Clear Sky. Clear Sky was a project under FINISM, under the health. We were trying to get funds to increase connectivity for electronic medical record systems, because the bandwidth to support EMRs, an e-chart, and Panorama, and telehealth, and all these electronic health stuff. You need the bandwidth to support it, especially for coordinated care and off-site backups and all that stuff. Engaging the community is important, especially when you're going to the First Nation community to engage their leadership, to let them know what you're doing, why you're there, what are the benefits, what are the potential risks, and how you're going to mitigate those risks. And keep in constant communication with the First Nation communities. We've done it in the form of as they have the annual Grand Assembly, where all the chiefs come together and have a meeting. We'll have a presentation. We'll also have newsletters, and actually Facebook is a big part of that. For the project, the three main pieces are the technical piece, the political piece, and the money. The money and the political I try to stay out of completely, but I always get dragged into it because I think I'm pretty good at the technical piece, so that's where I focus. I let the other people that are really smart in those other areas deal with that other stuff. And when you're bringing in these systems, there's going to be a change to the community on either business process or just change in general as you're bringing in something new. Because a lot of these communities, they simply don't have, an easy example would be brick and mortar facilities for banks. A lot of them don't have banks. They have to go to another community to cash a check. So now this would give them the option of online banking. Once you bring in something like online banking, then it brings up a whole bunch of security concerns. Well, who has access, who can see what, and that sort of ties into the education. And then when you train somebody on the education side, you have to provide them continuous support, because you can only train somebody so much, and then at some point in time, they'll reach their capacity. They'll have questions that, I didn't learn this, but what direction do I go? So you have to provide that contact to support their success. You also have to have the political support. In Manitoba, we have the chief of each community, but there's other councils as well as the First Nation Technology Council in Manitoba. So to get the support with the committees that are they're created by the chiefs that have the mandate to investigate and do the due diligence on a project like this, to get the support of those committees. All in all, it ties to local ownership. Even though the organization is installing, delivering, and providing the service, you still have to have that local engagement to provide ownership at the local level.
Excellent. Nico, in your experience, what makes a community network successful? What are the factors that will make it successful?
So we work in different territories. One is the First Nation territory. The other is the rest of the forgotten people around the world, like people that don't live in a city and is not a First Nation individual. There are a lot, ridiculously big community. And we work with all of them, both First Nation and not. The colleagues already talked a little bit about the complexity of First Nation territory, and this also applies, like local governments, politics within, overlaying governments, the state government and the traditional government. Those things also happen in the First Nations that we work with. So in our case, what I would say it's relevant for a community network to succeed. First is community involvement. So in First Nation territory in Mexico, for example, community involvement means for the assembly to decide that they are gonna do it, and for them to to define who's gonna run it. So they don't do things all together all the time, but find responsible people that is gonna be entitled to push the topic forward. In Latin America, in Argentina, for example, we don't have traditional, we don't have many, almost none, but there are a few First Nation communities, but we work more in rural areas where we don't have traditional structures. So for us, but we have a very long-standing cooperative and collaboration mindset. So now in the communities in Argentina, we create an assembly of villagers, and we run the network all together. And all of us individually are part of the network and participate in the network equally, or sort of equally. So that has proven to be a very successful model. Everyone, the people that are more technically savvy, the people that are not, the elder, the young, everyone gets together, decides what to do, and goes and does it all together. That has been proven to be the most successful model at the participation level, at the governance level also. Having a horizontal structure, so everyone being able to to engage all the parts of the network is also key, because that also talks about ownership. You can't own something that you don't understand. I mean, right now I would really, we could discuss for hours if we own the more expensive new cars, right? I mean, they have computers and they do things that we don't know how they work. So sometimes the only thing that we do is use the user interface, but we don't own them in a way. So for us,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry for your cars are okay. No. I was saying, like, for us, for true ownership means for everyone to know how the network works and being able to engage with it. Then there will be some that will say, okay, I prefer not to. Can you help me, or can I pay someone for doing that? Okay, but if you already know how it works, and you know how to maintain it, you know how to expand it, then it's okay if you don't want to and you want to do some other exchanges. And then we get to so maintaining networking infrastructure is ridiculously complex. I mean, how can we get a whole community where you can have physicians, you can have teachers, you can have farmers, you can have so many diverse education or professions. How can all of those people can get to do networking? So for that you need, so in Spanish would be tecnologías apropiables, but in English would be technology that can be owned, and technology that helps you learn from it. So we have been working to do this. We already have a model that is called LibreMesh and LibreRouter. LibreMesh is the software, LibreRouter is a device that communities can use to deploy in the telecommunications infrastructure without having to have any networking knowledge whatsoever. That goes together. Well, yeah, it's more about how the physics works. So how about aligning antennas and putting cables. More mechanical things than networking things. Everything else happens below the hood, or something like that. And the technology helps them learn on the way. If there's something that they need to understand better to make a decision, the technology helps them to learn that thing to make the decision that they have to make. So in that way, it's technology that can be owned and also expandable. Like if you know how it works. I mean, if you know to turn on and off a light, that's one level of ownership. But if you know how electricity works, then you can do so many other things that you're in your house or whatever you work for. The same goes for telecommunications. So we need technology that's open source and it's human-centered in a way. Then for us, it's key to have, so when we start a community network, we don't just appear in a place and just give away vouchers of free community networks for everyone.
No?
Sorry. We work with anchor institutions. So anchor institutions are organizations that are understood as public good institutions within the communities, and that are organizations that gather people together. So they can be public libraries, they can be community radios, they can be grassroots organizations on the field, like you. I mean, if you're already grassroots, let's talk about this, right? And we work together to help you or help these organizations, these anchor institutions, being able to be the leaders of the processes that we are gonna work together to build. Because you need someone to hold the fort in the process of taking ownership. It's not something that we can do. We are like a 10, 12 individual organization around the world. It's impossible for us to be everywhere. But if we have people on the field that want to work on these things, this is a very relevant thing. The other thing is local sense. So the internet is not built from the it's built from the leaves, not from the, how do you say? Trunk. The trunk, thank you. Sorry for my English. What makes the tree alive are the leaves that allow the tree to feed, right? I mean, it's the same here. I mean, we are the internet, not the infrastructure that we use. So we need to understand and create local sense and help them also own the technology for them to be able to create their own local sense. And that creates, so what connectivity is a tool for what? What are they gonna do and what this infrastructure is gonna support within the communities. And also the community of communities, the ability for the communities to work together. Like, for example, in Argentina we have a 5 communities network. So it's each community has their own network, but they grew enough for them to connect with each other, and now they peer and they transit. So peering is like we allow traffic to go from one network to the other. Transit, we allow traffic to go through networks to further networks, and that is already happening there. And they not only govern themselves, so they do things. The members of each community do things with each other, but also they collaborate the different communities to do bigger things, like the infrastructure that is in the mountains. We maintain it all together, not one community, and that is super important both for knowledge transfer, like for learning with each other, but also for creating a solid governance model. And the last thing for community network to succeed is seed funds. The communities are able to collect money. I mean, I have been in Javiche, for example. They had a terrible disease in their coffee plants for 2 years, so they couldn't sell. Even in that condition, they have $1 per month. And $1 per month in a community of 5,000 or 2,000 people is $2,000 per month. So you have a lot of resources that you can use if you pool them. But for a community to start, it's hard because you have to believe it's gonna work. You have to believe that this is gonna that everything's gonna be okay, and that is complex. But if we collectively find a way to seed these initiatives, it's not a fund that is you're gonna lose. They will be able to repay, and you use that for the next community. So that's another thing that is super relevant, and Indigenous Communities has been doing this amazingly. Hopefully we get more of that.
Constantino, same question, but I'll ask you to be somewhat brief so that we can open up to questions and some discussions.
So yes, and because I don't want to be repetitive, I will sort of reverse a little bit the question. I will tell you what actually, one of the things that if you do will definitely declare community networks as a failure, and that is not having very good policies. It's as simple as that. And I said in the beginning that spectrum, it's all about spectrum when it comes to policies, predominantly at least, because community networks need access to that spectrum. And before they appeared, we thought that we had sort of resolved the spectrum dilemma through auctions. However, these auctions go for millions and millions and millions of dollars, which by definition declare community networks not eligible if you want to participate. So you need to create, governments and policymakers need to create a licensing regime that will allow community networks first to sustain as businesses, and that is the easy thing because, you know, in many cases they don't even have a regime, so community networks by default are able to operate. But then as you move towards spectrum questions, there is where things are becoming a little bit tricky, and there is where you see the conflicting interests coming into play. And operators are actually waking up to the realization that, oh, there are also those community networks that they want a piece of that pie, etc. So when it comes to what can be done in order to ensure the success of community networks by policymakers, you know, in a nutshell, is to streamline and remove these onerous regulatory requirements. We need to enhance transparency in order to be able and understand what these policies are and how they operate within the framework that they want them to operate. There are tax, customs, and other fee exemptions that can be applied. I can give you an example. If you don't, if you have a trade regime that is very cumbersome and difficult, this will affect community networks, because let's say that you find equipment and that equipment needs to be shipped. If that equipment stays at customs for 6 months, then, you know, it's done. There is no reason for that equipment to even enter the country after that and be used, because after 6 months, it might be broken or it might be faulty. And the last thing is expand really universal services and other public funding opportunities. There are the universal funds available to all countries. Some of them have been used actually quite efficiently and have been supporting community networks, but there are a lot of universal funds out there in a lot of countries that continue to be unutilized, and a very good way would be to actually sponsor and support community networks.
Thank you. Open it up. Any questions for our panelists?
I have a question, especially for First Nations and Inuit communities. When you are opening the internet and you're increasing the speed and the connection, there are also threats, because now there is a harassment, discrimination. There is a lot of threats here in Canada with the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. So I can say, even to go to the policy perspective, what can be done, or what are you doing to counterpart all these things that are happening?
Well, I wouldn't say that the internet in of itself creates the new threats. It's just a tool of, you know, delivery for communication, and of course it's that broad spectrum between sort of, you know, valuable communication and problematic communication. But it also gives us an opportunity to actually challenge the stereotypes and misinformation. So Inuit have actually been able to use social media especially, you know, to explain, you know, our way of life, and the fact that our 100-mile diet includes seals and polar bears and walrus, and, you know, and I can say that our interventions and engagements, you know, changed the Green Party policy on whaling. Tanya Tagak, one of our Inuit singers, you know, is quite active on social media, as is a couple of other women that, you know, the producer of Angry Inuk, you know, regularly sort of challenges the stereotypes and calls it out, you know, as hate speech and discrimination and racism. Whereas we didn't have that voice before. You know, I can tell you a lot of those sentiments were being, you know, started in the 1970s with Greenpeace movements, IFAW, and we had no voice. We were so isolated, so remote, that we didn't even know, for the most part, you know, what was being said, and then we would, have to sort of send one or two, delegates or representatives to a particular, forum and then try to counter that, and it wasn't very successful. So I would say that I'd rather have this situation where we are aware of it and we can respond to it quickly than how it was before.
Phil, did you want to respond, or?
Well, out of sight, out of mind, like a lot of these, I've heard other presentations where some of these other countries where the political powers will shut down the internet to prevent communication from getting out. So this is kind of like a flip. I think the benefits far outweigh the risks, and for the risks you could educate, provide education on that.
You had a question?
Just to bounce off of that, I think what you were raising is risks that, you were talking about context here, but in like Latin America and several other countries, people are literally assassinated and murdered for what they put out there. And journalists have traditionally been target spots of things, and now that the way we're communicating and everything is kind of going grassroots, those people are very vulnerable because they don't have the infrastructure or systems or to be able to protect themselves from their governments or whoever those other entities are who are doing work to target them and literally obliterate them manually. So I don't know if anyone has solutions. Those are some of the problems that we have to think about at digital democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to protect yourself, there would be, I'd get into like information security, where you want to basically encrypt everything, end-to-end encryption. You want to communicate over VPN channels, over secure channels to post your content, which that's a whole separate discussion.
So what is there any ideas on these threats? Any experiences?
You mean the internet threats and how they translate? So, I mean, we just had a little bit of a debate here with Nico. I really think that, at least from the perspective of where I'm coming from, it depends on what you mean by the internet, right? The internet in and by itself is not a thing. It's a network of networks. It's a way to communicate and connect. So it is the way you use it and the way you decide to use it that makes the difference. And what I find interesting in community networks is the fact that at least in the beginning, when they decide to connect and build that community networks, it comes from a place where they don't want to use it for bad things. They want to use it for specific social needs. They want to use it because they want to be part of what is happening out there and be exposed to the information, and be exposed to the cultural exchange, and be exposed to the democratic processes. So to me, this is a very interesting detail because it really goes back to the heart of why the internet was created to begin with, right? Back in the 60s by those researchers. And it also reflects this approach that we see occasionally to those of you who are going to the ITF by those engineers who are still sitting there, and they believe in an internet that occasionally does not, if you want, reflect necessarily the reality of what other people are experiencing. And it's really interesting to see it that it is this tool that is able to change a lot of things that are happening in the world.
Please.
Thank you for the answer. I'd love to see the conversation come back to the digital divide, because I think that a lot of times in Western conversations, we get kind of obsessed with security and threats. Not that they're to be diminished or anything, but basic connectivity and the idea of the internet being a public utility that just so many people don't have access to, and is crippling them for participating in society and participating in the world economically, politically, and all other different kinds of ways. I think that we don't often leave enough space to talk about that. So I wanted to ask the panel, because I don't know much about the laws in Canada, but I was really alarmed by what you said about Canada not really having an internet strategy. And I know that in the United States, that was one of the biggest issues with net neutrality, was this idea of declassifying the internet as a utility, and therefore giving companies sort of the run of how they want to do things in terms of classifying it as a luxury and charging exorbitant prices and creating essentially a divide anywhere you want to have it. So I guess, you were talking about different prices and different services that are offered. How is the government working with companies in your areas and, or more generally for the rest of the panel? What can we do about making sure that there isn't sort of like conspiracies going on to deconnect people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just recently, with the president of CanNor, co-hosted panels or sort of a session with our internet service providers and our northern regional area. So that was in my area, Nunavut, Nunavik, Labrador, for the most part the eastern section where there is no fiber and we're all satellite dependent. And it was useful to sort of to have finally everyone in the same room. I mean, literally, it's as absurd as that is that people are not talking to each other, and that the current sort of approach, in so much as that the federal government does have a program in which is proposal based. And so those who have the most money or are the most organized, are usually able to write the proposals, and they also have lobbyists that they can pay for, and they tend to be more successful. It's very hard for us in the north when you are so much further. You may not have the capacity, political capacity. You may not have the IT technical capacity. You may not have, everything that's really required to kind of even look at what are the options that you should be lobbying for, let alone writing the proposals for, or the business case. I mean, the business case is really, challenging because it's not a good business case, but it's a social, political, economic case that, that you have to make. I remember going and asking the Greenlanders recently when I was at a meeting, and they've put fiber into Nuke, and then they've been scaling it out, and so they've got at least now another almost 6, if not 8 communities connected. And I sort of said, well, when you did your business case, to make this happen, and there must be some sort of reports that say, this was a good investment. And they just looked at me like, why would we do that? Like, we did do the business case and we didn't actually do the reports because it's so obvious that we needed to do it. And I was like, damn, it would have helped me. And that's the thing I find almost around a lot of the circumpolar other nations, Iceland and, northern Scandinavian countries, they just know it's a necessity. You don't make a business case for, water. You don't make a business case for, well, you do in Ontario for electricity.
Yes.
But, I mean, the essential sort of utilities, for the most part, governments have recognized that you need to invest, and because all the upfront costs are not just necessarily translated into quote unquote sort of a dollar end investment. It's you need it to be able to function. I can't even remember what your question was anymore. This is why politicians don't answer your question, is because we've forgotten it. We do really, I think, as a country, at all levels, need to grapple with that. The current approach, for funding or deployment of funding and how you measure the outcomes and benefits needs to be completely redone. Okay, I think I did answer your question.
In Canada, we're approaching connecting the North in a very Canadian way. Prepping for the meeting with CanNor, do a little bit of digging, and I think there was 6 studies done on how to connect the Canadian North over the last 10 years. 6 studies, up to 98 recommendations, which we boiled down to 5 or 6. But it's been studied to death, but nothing's been done.
And I think the other sort of thing that I'll add is that we've got a bit of a mindset in Canada where 90% of the people live 100 miles from the U.S. border, and it's like, it's your fault you live in, the far north, and that, we shouldn't and, have to subsidize you. And, the Northerners are hardy, and it's like, well, what does that mean? It means that you're, expected and entitled to have lesser quality, whether it's healthcare, education, or connectivity and all that. So I think there's a big difference between sort of what we perceive ourselves as, Canadians on, we're this fair, equal, great, vast Arctic nation, but then we kind of, when it comes to actually putting the money in or to make it happen so that there is true equality, it doesn't really pan out that way. One MP out of 338 MPs, it's tough when you have that as the other sort of structural political inequities.
Excellent. It's now 14 after, so we're officially out of time. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you to our panelists. This was an excellent discussion.
No way back in Santa Fe.
If anyone
I
came
do.
in after I handed out these
Surprisingly
information packets about the Indigenous Connectivity Summit, let me know and I'll give you one.
No, we, the Green Party shadow.
Just like whatever the hell they want.
I would. No.
I would like to ask you about like the social policies in Mexico. Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Of course.
Always was.
Hi. Oh, hi, how are you? So finally, I meet you. I'm Jake
We have to provide
We are organizing a workshop in Santa
Can you send me the info? I am hoping not. I would love to call them.
Yeah.
So I make a signature to the idea.
Yeah.
And he presented it. And as I said, being seeing the grandmother putting together the wires was one of the most emotional things I have ever seen. Because my grandmother was a grandmother.
Exactly.
So